Biden saying that officials are now investigating whether there is a link between the deadly terror attack in New Orleans and the Tesla Cybertruck explosion that happened outside of Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas. This is some new video of that explosion. You see it there outside the Trump Hotel. The driver of that vehicle was killed. The driver of that vehicle was killed. The driver of that vehicle was killed. 7 others were injured.
This person who died in this attack.
The driver of that vehicle was killed.
Hey, welcome to this episode of The Soul Trap. Today we are going to talk about another strange occurrence that took place in Las Vegas. No, we're not talking about the Las Vegas alien incursion, which we will be talking about very, very soon. But today we are talking about the Cybertruck bombing. Matthew Livelsberger on January 1st blew up his Cybertruck out front of the Trump Hotel. Let's take a look at the news recordings and bring ourselves up to speed just to remember what happened on that fateful morning.
That officials are now investigating whether there is a link between the deadly terror attack in New Orleans and the Tesla Cybertruck explosion that happened outside of Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas. This is some new video of that explosion. You see it there outside the Trump Hotel. The driver of that vehicle was killed. 7 others were injured, and we now know that that Cybertruck was rented in Colorado.
Tonight, we're learning more about a possible motive into the New Year's Cybertruck explosion in Las Vegas, with Washington, D.C. mentioned in the bomber's newly unveiled manifesto. Authorities revealed the document, which outlined his political ideology, went as far as to say he hoped the explosion would lead to armed militants surrounding D.C. to purge Democrats from the government.
So what exactly happened? You know, we have to be very careful here at the Soul Trap. I think all of us in this particular space have to be careful because we have a tendency, once we see the conspiracy world, everything becomes a conspiracy. Well, by definition, if everything is a conspiracy, then nothing is. So we have to be careful. Some things are just as they are. Some things are just people being crazy. Mankind, humanity has been crazy for a long time. There was no conspiracy. Cain was just a sinful jerk when he killed Abel. Well, maybe there was a conspiracy. I digress. Nonetheless, the point is some things are as they are. They appear as they actually appear to be. But we do know that we live in a world that is run by conspiracy. We do realize that there are conspiratorial elements at play. We do understand that there are shadow governments. There are different kind of puppeteers behind the curtains, pulling the strings, directing things accordingly. And the fact of the matter is, if you're a Bible believer, you certainly know that. You need go no further than Luke chapter number 4, where Satan, speaking to Christ in the desert temptation, clearly said that he is in charge of the kingdoms of this world at this particular moment, in this particular dispensation. Even the Apostle Paul said the same thing, calling him the God of this world in 2 Corinthians. And so we do realize that while not everything is a conspiracy, some things are. We also know this, that the closer we get to the rapture, the closer we get to the return of the Lord, and the closer we get ultimately to the restoration of all things, and keep that in mind because that is really what we're driving towards. The closer we get, the Bible tells us very clearly that there will be deceptions. People will deceive and be deceived. So we take a look at this particular situation on January 1st, and initially you think, man, what an awful thing. There's a guy with PTSD, a guy that's battling depression, and maybe he just goes off the deep end. But the more we scratch the surface, the more we look, the more it's hard to turn a blind eye to some things that just don't make sense, facts that don't align, things that occurred that don't make sense. And the scarier thing is, from a conspiratorial point of view, events and circumstances that take place that do make sense when once you see that there is a dark element behind the curtain pulling the strings. So let's take a look at the story and see where we are and what's going on and what we can draw from this particular story. So, U.S. Newsline, Matthew Livelsberger claimed Cybertruck bombing was to cleanse his mind, quote unquote, of brothers he lost and trashed, quote, feckless leadership of a USA near collapse. In an article published by Anna Young, Las Vegas Cybertruck bomber Matthew Livelsberger claimed his shocking suicide wasn't a terror attack, but a way for the U.S. soldier to, quote, cleanse his mind while blasting the feckless leadership of the United States and a near collapse. This is what authorities have revealed to us Friday. Now, before we go any further with the article, one has to ask, exactly what happened with Matthew? Our hearts go out to his family, our hearts go out to his loved one, our hearts go out to him. What an awful, awful way to die, if indeed he is dead. And we'll come back to that in just a few moments. But we do have to ask, is this a case of PTSD gone to the extreme? Or actually, is this a man fighting against a Manchurian brainwashing reality? You know, we all enjoy the Jason Bourne movies. There's nothing as good as watching Jason Bourne go medieval on somebody. But when you actually get down to what the storyline talks about and what the Jason Bourne and those kind of ilk imply, it is scary to think that this could be a story that we're dealing with here in Las Vegas with far deeper realities going on than we want to think. The article goes on to state, Livelsberger, an active member of the Army's elite special forces, left behind 2 notes in a charged cell phone recovered inside the singed Tesla he rented that suggests his motive for detonating explosives as he simultaneously shot himself in front of the Trump International Hotel Wednesday, Las Vegas police said. It is interesting to me that they were able to get into the phone as quickly as they were. They got into the phone, found the notes, and almost within a matter of 48 hours understood exactly what his motives were. Now, we're told that he shot himself in front of the Trump Plaza and then almost simultaneously, which is very fascinating in and of itself, the Cybertruck exploded with the fireworks, that's correct, the fireworks and other flammable material he used to create the firebomb. This was not a terrorist attack, quote. It was a wake-up call. Americans only pay attention to spectacles and violence. What better way to get my point across than a stunt with fireworks and explosives, Livelsberger, who was 37 years old, wrote in his notes app. Now, I have to ask myself, does that sound even remotely like a man who is really trying to wake people up? A man who is so concerned that he's willing to take his own life. Now, this is a man who has access to a lot of different platforms to get his message out. But what he says is that Americans only pay attention to spectacles and violence. What better way to get my point across than a stunt with fireworks and explosives? That is what the man said, we're told, who drove the Cybertruck in front of the Trump Plaza there, who drove it in front of the Trump International Hotel. That's what we're told that he said. Listen to it again. Americans only pay attention to spectacles and violence. What better way to get my point across than a stunt with fireworks and explosives? Is that the way that you would refer to your death? If you were dying the death of a martyr, or even if you were somewhat on the crazy side? He called what he did in this supposed letter note a stunt. I think sometimes that could be almost a Freudian slip of whomever it was that wrote that note. Because it does not sound to me like a man who is tormented by depression on one hand, nor does it sound to me like a man who is raging against the machine. It almost sounds to me like something scribbled down in a few moments and then moved on. Police, the article states, revealed that Livelsberger claimed in a note that the bombing was not a terrorist attack. Why did I personally do it now, he stated? As mentioned earlier, I needed to cleanse my mind of the brothers I've lost and relieve myself of the burden of the lives I took. In another letter recovered by police, Livelsberger implored his fellow service members, veterans, and all Americans to, quote, wake up. We are being led by weak and feckless leadership who only serve to enrich themselves, he wrote, according to authorities. Las Vegas police said that the notes were found on a torched cell phone recovered inside the rented Tesla. It's interesting to note as well, too, that he didn't write them as much as he put them on his phone. We'll come back to that as well. Apparently, from all reports that we see, Livelsberger shot himself just as the Tesla detonated, according to the Las Vegas police. Reports have also been released that Matthew Livelsberger was treated for depression just before the Cybertruck suicide bombing. Quoted, he wanted to get more help. Now, once again, I think it's very interesting for us to see a connection, whether it be all the way back in Columbine or whether it be here with the Cybertruck explosion. There always seems to be a connection, more often than not, between depression and these kind of violent acts. The go-between often is a medication. It would be interesting to find out if he was prescribed any medication, if he was seen extensively by any kind of psychiatrist or psychologist, and it would be interesting to see if the psychologist and the psychiatry and the medication was through the VA, all connected together. As we know, Livelsberger was an active member of the Army Elite Special Forces. He had told members that with the United States of America, the best country that ever existed, but right now he told people we are terminally ill and headed towards collapse. Now, I would happen to agree with him. PTSD or not, crazy or not, depressed or not, he is correct. Livelsberger had been, reports state, deployed to Afghanistan in 2017 and in 2018, and was known to be a, quote, Rambo-type patriot and a staunch supporter of President-elect Donald Trump. He had been in the Army for at least 19 years, joining the Green Beret in 2006, according to Profile. According to his uncle, Livelsberger was a staunch supporter of Trump. Federal officials suggest Livelsberger had been suffering from PTSD and other quote-unquote personal issues that contributed to his suicide bombing. Although this incident is more public and more sensational than usual, well, that's an understatement, it ultimately appears to be a tragic case of suicide involving a heavily decorated combat veteran who was struggling with PTSD and other issues, FBI Special Agent Spencer Evans stated. The feds also found, quote, strong evidence that links Livelsberger to a conspiracy-laden manifesto he allegedly penned and emailed to a U.S. Army intelligence officer ahead of the fatal explosion. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. There are some strange things that connect this, and I'm sure that some people can write them off simply as coincidences, but nonetheless, they are very, very strange. One of the things that's interesting is that Vegas Cybertruck bomber Matthew Livelsberger revealed as a Special Forces soldier overseeing drones. Well, one of the things in his manifesto is that he talks about China and the drones and their anti-gravitational force technology development. That's an interesting overlap. Another one is that Vegas Cybertruck bomber actually shot himself in the head at almost the exact moment that the bombing went off, that the explosion took place. There is no recorded sound of a gunshot. There's no flash of a gunshot whatsoever. We also see that New Orleans ISIS terrorist and the Cybertruck bomber, this is very interesting. Don't forget, let's pause for a minute. Don't forget, almost around the same time, we have this New Orleans ISIS terrorist attack that takes place in New Orleans and ravages through the streets of New Orleans. Let's pause and refresh ourselves on that.
This is some of the new video coming out from the New Orleans attack. This is courtesy Crystal, which is over in that area. This is one of the cameras that was pointed at a crowd that essentially ran for their life as that truck did speed by. Now, investigators say the rented truck that was used by that New Orleans attacker had an ISIS flag on it.
The early hours of New Year's Day in New Orleans. This was Bourbon Street, not long after 3 a.m. 2 people are seen lying in the street as armed officers race to the scene. In the heart of the city's French Quarter, a man had driven a pickup truck into crowds who'd come to clock in the new year.
It was very intentional behavior. This man was trying to run over as many people as he possibly could. This perpetrator, who went around our barricades in order to conduct this, he was hell-bent on creating the carnage and the damage that he did.
The attacker has been named as 42-year-old Shamsuddin Jabbar, a U.S. citizen from Texas.
All right, so here's the connection. What does an ISIS terrorist have to do with the Vegas Cybertruck bomber? Well, both of them served at Fort Bragg. The truth is, there is no definitive link between the Vegas Cybertruck explosion and the New Orleans attack other than that service at Fort Bragg. But it is very coincidental, and some might even say conspiratorial. Now, as mentioned earlier, there was a manifesto, an email that was sent to an intelligence officer, Shoemate. He then went on the Sean Ryan podcast and read some of the email and shared some of that. In the email, in the manifesto, Livelsberger referred to the drones as, quote, the most dangerous threat to national security, alleging the flying objects used, quote unquote, gravity manipulation technology and had the ability to evade detection. The retired U.S. Navy SEAL revealed this on his show. Officials are still working to determine the origin and legitimacy of the document. Now, police said Livelsberger logged his personal and political grievances into his phone about 10 days leading up to the bombing. That's pretty convenient. He also kept a log outlining multiple locations along his route from Colorado to Las Vegas, officials said. The father of a baby daughter left his Colorado Springs home the day after Christmas, apparently following an argument with his wife over infidelity. 2 sources familiar with the investigation told the Post. Now, that leaves a lot of vagary right there. He has a daughter. He leaves Colorado Springs apparently after some kind of argument with his wife about infidelity. Now, what's fascinating about it is, and we're going to put the map up on the screen. After leaving Colorado, he rented a Cybertruck through the Turo app and made his way to Vegas, where he parked in front of the Trump Hotel and detonated explosives stashed in the trunk as he shot himself in the head. Now, here's what's interesting to me about it. And maybe I'm grasping at straws, and if I am, send me an email and I'll give it its due credence. But if you look at the map, he leaves Denver, Colorado, drives to Monument, Colorado. Then he drives to Trinidad, Colorado. And then guess where he ends up? Las Vegas, New Mexico. If you look at the map, he gets in and does not take a straight shot across to Las Vegas, Nevada. He takes a straight shot down to Las Vegas, New Mexico. Did you know that there was a Las Vegas, New Mexico? I did not. He drives to Las Vegas, New Mexico. From there, Albuquerque, Gallup, Holbrook, Flagstaff, Kingsman, and then he shoots up to Las Vegas, Nevada. That's interesting to me. I'm wondering in my mind, and I know I could be playing maybe over extreme on this, but I'm wondering in my mind if it could be possible that this guy was having a break, that this guy was some sort of a Manchurian candidate type of a situation, and his mind broke and he drives to Las Vegas. That's all he knows, but he drives to the wrong Las Vegas. It's interesting to me because in one of the early plot lines of Jason Bourne movie, He's actually in the wrong hotel room, in the wrong place at the wrong time. I digress. Once the bomb went off, 7 people suffered minor injuries from the blast, while Livelsberger's body was burned beyond recognition. His body was burned so bad it could not be recognized. However, somehow or another, his passport and his Army ID were found in the vehicle. It kind of reminds you of 9/11 when the entire building was disintegrated, but we managed to find the ID of one of the terrorists that literally flew the plane into the building. It's kind of funny how those always crop up. In addition to the notes on his phone, police also obtained new surveillance footage from charging stations where Livelsberger made stops as he headed to Sin City. Livelsberger's wife broke up with him days before the bombing, sources have said. Authorities suggest he may have stopped in New Mexico to legally purchase fireworks used in the explosion. Officials also made a positive match of Livelsberger's 2 tattoos before and after the explosion, showing photos of the Army vet's burnt body. Police said they are still reviewing the immense data found on Livelsberger's cell phone, adding that investigators are working to gain access to a second phone and laptop. Quote, "We are barely scratching the surface," Las Vegas Sheriff Kevin McHale said, and almost hourly receiving additional information requiring substantial investigative efforts on the part of joint investigation between ourselves, the FBI, and the ATF. So let's take a quick look at the email that was sent and see what he says. He writes here on December 31st at 10:42 a.m., "In case I do not make it to my decision point or on to the Mexico border, I am sending this now. Please do not release this until 1 January and keep my identity private until then." Now it's interesting when you read that there are 2 statements there. One is the Mexico border, the other is the decision point. Now, I could be wrong, but if I were going to go to Mexico, I wouldn't rent an electric truck. I just wouldn't do that. So he must have reached a decision point. But what is the decision point? Was it to do what he did? I don't know. There are some people that are arguing that he may still be alive. Nonetheless, he goes on to say, first off, I am not under duress or hostile influence or control. My first car was a 2006 black Ford Mustang V6 for verification. Now that's a fascinating line. First of all, I'm not under duress or hostile influence or control. Now, we sometimes get accused in our genre, in our space, of being over-conspiratorial, as we began the show with. But this guy here is saying, I'm not, this is a special forces now. He's saying, I'm not under duress or hostile influence or control. Very interesting. And then he gives a verification of what his first car was, trying to verify the reality of who he is and that he is operating on his own accord. The email goes on to say, what we have been seeing with, quote, drones is the operational use of gravitic propulsion systems, powered aircraft, by most recently China in the East Coast, but throughout history, the U.S. Now that one right there, that little phrase I think is getting lost in all of the mumbo jumbo. Let me read that to you again. What we have been seeing with drones is the operational use, and I'm going to change his wording a little because I think it's a grammatical error. These the operational use of gravitational propulsion systems, powered aircraft, by most recently China in the East Coast, but throughout history, the U.S. Now, what would that mean? That sentence implies to me that what we are seeing with the drones recently is China, but throughout history, the U.S. What kind of history is he talking about? I'll tell you what my theory is. I think he's talking about history since 1947. I think he's talking about anti-gravitational propulsion system, which Bob Lazar talks about in his Area 51 world, and our reverse engineering. What happened at Roswell, at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Area 51, Ground Zero, Dreamland, whatever you want to call it, I think what he's saying is that this kind of technology has been around primarily in the US, but now we're seeing China. Where did the technology come from? That's a show for another time. Who is in charge of the technology? Is it alien? Is it extra-dimensional? But the point of the matter is this guy is saying something here that we've been talking about for a while. He goes on to say, only we in China have this capability. I wonder why that is. I wonder why it's only us in China, not Russia, not England, not France, not Germany, not Japan. Interesting. China, he states, has been launching them from the Atlantic, from submarines for years. But this activity recently has picked up. Now, I think it's interesting to note that he said that's been going on for years. As of now, it is just a show of force, and they are using it similar to how they use the balloon for Signet and ISR, which are also part of the integrated comms system. There are dozens of those balloons in the air at any given time. The so what is because of the speed and stealth of these unmanned AC. They are the most dangerous threat to national security that has ever existed. They basically have an unlimited payload capacity and can park it over the White House if they wanted. It's checkmate. Interesting. The USG needs to give the history of this, how we are employing it and weaponizing it, how China is employing them, and what the way forward is. China is poised to attack anywhere in the East Coast. Now that's an interesting. The U.S. government needs to give, listen to this line, the U.S. government needs to give the history of this. Why? And then notice the next phrase, how we are employing it and weaponizing it. Now think about that for a minute. And I know I'm trying to be deductive here, but we need to give the history of this and how it's being weaponized. Well, that would imply to me that there is a unique history to it and that its initial history was not weapons-based. In other words, this is not a technology. My deduction is that this guy's saying this is not a technology that came from the military-industrial complex. Otherwise, you wouldn't say it like that. What he's saying is that there is a unique history to this anti-gravitational propulsion system, and it is being weaponized, which implies it was not initially developed for weaponization. Now China is employing it, and he's saying we have a problem. I've been followed for over a week now from likely Homeland or FBI, and they are looking to move on me and are unlikely going to let me cross into Mexico. Interesting. But won't because they know I'm armed and I have a massive VBIED. I've been trying to maintain a very visible profile and have kept my phone, and they are definitely digitally tracking me. I have knowledge of this program and also war crimes that were covered up during the airstrikes in Nimruz province, Afghanistan in 2019 by the administration, DOD, DEA, and CIA. What would the DEA have to do with Afghanistan? Oh, that's right, the poppy fields, heroin. I conducted targeting for these airstrikes of over 125 buildings. 65 were struck because of CVI-CAS that killed hundreds of civilians in a single day. U.S. FORA continued strikes after spotting civilians on initial targets. It was supposed to take 6 minutes and scramble all aircraft in CENTCOM. The UN basically called these war crimes, but the administration made them disappear. I was part of that cover-up with US FORA and agents of the DEA. So I don't know if my abduction attempt is related to either. Say that again? He said, I don't know if my abduction attempt is related to either. I worked with General Miller's IO staff on this as well, as the response to Bala Murbaugh, and commander at the time can validate this. It's blanked out. He believed he was trying to be abducted. He writes, "You need to elevate this to the media so we avoid a world war, because this is a mutually assured destruction." For vetting, my LinkedIn is Matt Berg or Matt Livelsberger. An active duty 18Z out of 1 to 10. My profile is public. I have an active TSSCI with UAP, USAP access. Does this guy sound crazy? Maybe. Does this guy sound like he's just talking nonsense? Maybe. PTSD? Maybe. Or is this guy telling us something that needed to be hidden? And the only way to hide it was to make him look like the crazy guy, the crazy lone gunman, the crazy lone killer that nobody can understand and will get washed in the turbulence of news within 72 hours. Much like they did with the Vegas shooter, much like they did with the Fort Hood shooter, much like they have done with Lee Harvey Oswald and with others down through the years. What is going on over the skies? You know, a couple weeks ago, we did a show with Now the End Begins and Jeff Grider, and we got banned on YouTube. We thought it was because we were talking about the... But no. I'm wondering now if it wasn't because we were talking about that, but rather it was because we were talking about the drones. Maybe we're getting too close to the truth. Maybe the truth of what's been happening is a little bit closer than we think. Remember, Donald Trump told us that the government knows.
Can you comment on the drones that are flying around New Jersey ports? It seems like the American people have a big disconnect.
The government knows what is happening. Look, our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage, they can go right into that garage. They know where it came from and where it went. And for some reason, they don't want to comment. And I think they'd be better off saying what it is. Our military knows and our president knows.
What did they know, President Trump? And what are you going to reveal? Donald Trump is coming into power with a lot of bravado. He wants to annex Canada. No harm, no foul. He wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And he is gunning for China.
China.
What is happening over the skies? Maybe this is just a guy that broke. Maybe it is exactly as it appears to be, a soldier with a sad tale of PTSD that decided to rent a Cybertruck. Of all things, a Tesla Cybertruck, a Tesla, Elon Musk connected with Donald Trump. Oh, and by the way, a truck that can drive itself. Now, the reports are that you have to have a manned person behind the wheel. But if a truck could drive itself with a manned person behind the wheel, how hard do you think it would be to reprogram it? Especially if you were the owner of the technology. But, nonetheless, maybe he was crazy. Maybe not. Maybe what this man was a lot more sane than we realize. And because he was so sane, he had to be made to look crazy. You see, crazy is forgotten in the history and tossed away in the trash bin of history. John Wilkes Booth, he was just a crazy Southern rabble-rouser. There was no conspiracy whatsoever of 5 Jesuit Catholics connected with the death of Abraham Lincoln, who was concerned that it was a Jesuit plot that fostered and forced through the Civil War. Was Lee Harvey Oswald just a crazy guy? Sure, he's just a crazy guy until Jack Ruby, a known gangster, walked into the Dallas police station and shot him. Was it just a crazy guy that opened fire there in Las Vegas? He just happened to be more accurate than anybody in the history of bump stocks could have ever been hoped to have been accurate before? Or was there multiple gunmen on site, on the ground? Is this guy, Matthew, just a crazy special forces? And I use the term crazy from PTSD. Or is there something more? Something that he had to be made to look that way because he was so near the truth. Could it be that we're on the verge of World War III? Could it be that we're on the verge of World War III using technology that is otherworldly? Could it be that crazy is the new sane?
Hotel in Las Vegas. Investigators say the Army Green Beret who was driving used artificial intelligence to help build the explosive devices. Andres Gutierrez has more.
Las Vegas Metro Police said Tuesday that Matthew Livelsberger used ChatGPT to help plan his Cybertruck bombing.
Of MK Ultra, that maybe this Tesla thing that's going on, that's Matt Livelsberger. So you think he could be a victim of something like that, but could be a victim of MK Ultra. Yeah, but I've worked on deployments with dudes like this, Spec Ops dudes. No one, absolutely no one that would make it to that community, if they were going to want to cause a bunch of damage, is going to throw a bunch of gas and fireworks in the back of a solid steel vehicle and think that they're going to do a bunch of damage. Nobody.
Why are both New Year's Day supposed attackers associated with the U.S. Army headquarters for psychological operations? 4th Psychological Operations Group. Livelsberger family questions narrative, says he was a huge Trump supporter and would have been able to make a more sophisticated bomb after he allegedly shot himself prior to blowing up the Cybertruck. And then, conveniently, everything blows up, burns up, but his
OpenAI which developed that several models are designed to Police also released new video that shows Livelsberger pouring prior to the arrival of the hotel. The vehicle was full of explosive material, fireworks, 7 pounds of birch. Police say the muzzle flash from the gun used to shoot himself might have triggered the blast.
It is important to note that the consumer fireworks are designed specifically to non-mass detonate. This limited the explosive effect.
Officials also showed additional writings by Livelsberger where he claimed he had no intention of killing anyone besides himself, which CBS reported.